Look, if you'd have told me 2 months ago that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle was going to be any good, I would have said one thing. Bullshit. Just look back through the trailers. I mean, it was impossible to tell what the game even was, let alone if it would play well. Microsoft hasn't exactly had the best track record recently, and to be honest, neither has Machine Games with Wolfenstein Youngblood. Let's forget about that. The Great Circle just looked a bit weird. From the first-person fistfights to the perspective shifts, and the choice to use Harrison Ford's direct likeness from the 80s, and for Indiana Jones to be voiced by none other than Troy Baker, the marketing cycle was just kind of surreal. Now, imagine my surprise then when reviews dropped, describing this as some sort of weird, immersive sim, Hitman-esque hybrid, as similar to Dishonored as it is to Machine Games' past work. I was like, oh my god, I need to know more. Dishonored is one of, if not my favorite video game of all time. I know it's a little blurry, but this is a Dishonored poster up on my wall there, so it's easy for me to say, right? Hearing the buzz around this game, I was so excited. So, let's get the question out of the way. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Is it good? Of course it is. And let me tell you why. It not only nails its gameplay, but it manages to do it in a way that feels really authentic to Indiana Jones as an IP. And by that, I mean like 80s indie, not just through its main story, but also through its intricately designed side quests that seamlessly weave back into the main plot, breathing new life into such an iconic character. And it's not just nostalgia bait. As an actual video game, its really functional stealth system, combined with these rich, detailed, handcrafted environments, lead to some incredible moments of emergent gameplay, paired with some really, really great set pieces that can truly be a sight to behold. It's definitely not perfect. Enemy AI can be a little bit goofy at times, and some side content can feel a little like busy work. But overall, this game is just fun, blending all of its elements together into something that feels really cohesive. So without further ado, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Where do I begin? So I want to be really clear about what this game actually is before we get into the details, because really, I think from the trailers, this could have been a number of different things. In essence, this is a stealth game. It's much like Dishonored, but without the buildcraft or magical powers. The vast majority of this game takes place in these hub areas, be it the Vatican or Giza, giving you a main goal to complete and a plethora of side activities as well, ranging from simple fetch quests to spelunking in certain temples. It's not open world, but these hub cities are quite big, and you're effectively set loose on them to complete their objectives or not complete them in any order that you see fit. There's a real sense of freedom when it comes to exploring these environments, which is really great. There is combat, yet the expectation is that you're going to be sneaking behind people and knocking them out, although the game does give you plenty of opportunity to do otherwise if you so well choose. All in all, it is a globe-trotting adventure as you'd expect from Indiana Jones, and a very competent stealth experience to boot. Again, not really what I would have expected, but here we are. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle takes place 1 year after the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indy's workplace, Marshall College in Connecticut, is burglarized by a mysterious and very large man portrayed by the late Tony Todd, stealing, at least to Jones, an insignificant cat mummy that he recovered from Siwa earlier that year, leaving behind an amulet with engravings referencing the Catholic Church. Jones takes this as an opportunity to abandon his duties in pursuit of a good mystery, as he travels to the Vatican to uncover just what secrets this amulet might hold. It's in the Vatican that Jones meets Gina Lombardi, an investigative reporter whose sister is missing and seemingly deeply entrenched in this enigma. And look, I'll be the first to admit it's a little trite, But come on, it's Indiana Jones. And that's the main point that I want to make here with the game's writing. It feels really authentic to the source material. It's kind of swashbuckling in a way. The original films are classics for a reason, and you can really sense that reverence that Machine Games has for Indiana Jones in every aspect of the story. The way that its characters speak and hold themselves, the often very unserious tone, it holds up in a way that feels really true to the original films. A good example of this is a fight scene where the characters are just fumbling around in that really typical 80s slapstick style. It's somehow both stressful and really hilarious at the same time. The characters you meet are all incredibly well written as well and would feel right at home in any of the original films, from reporters to archaeologists, aristocrats to monastic Catholics. They not only feel like they could exist in the time period that the game is set in, but serve the plot in many an interesting way, oftentimes being a cautionary tale about how things could go for Indy should he remain so obsessed with his work. And the main antagonist, man, he is the exact right blend of imposing but wimpy, psychotic but calculating. An archaeologist like Jones, the pair are, in some ways, two sides of the same coin, equally driven by their obsession, yet obviously with very different ideals. Dare I say, this might be my favorite Indiana Jones villain ever. I know he's got big shoes to fill, but trust me on this, Voss just works really, really well in the context of the story. And look, I can't talk about Indiana Jones himself without mentioning Troy Baker's ridiculously good performance. Using the man himself, Harrison Ford's likeness, Baker truly embodies this character in a way that I was almost certain he wouldn't be able to pull off. And that's not a dig at Troy, it's just that Ford's character holds himself in such a specific way. I was really unsure if anyone could fill his shoes other than Ford himself. You know how when an actor's in so many movies, you almost just start to see them as the actor themselves rather than the character they're playing? Troy Baker, while immensely talented, is a little like that for me. So to say that apart from one specific moment, I couldn't even tell that it was him, that's pretty high praise, I think. There's one more thing I want to talk about when it comes to the writing. Due to this being set in 1937, taking you to many a corner of the globe, it has this really interesting opportunity to act as a sort of period piece about a time that isn't really all that well represented in video games. You know, there's plenty of World War II stories, there's whole games dedicated to just that event in history, but what the Great Circle manages to do is capture a moment in time before everything went to shit in Europe. Through so many aspects of its writing and its choice of locations, the game does a really intriguing job at showcasing the world on the brink of World War II rather than just being in it. You'll find text logs scattered throughout the world detailing the Axis starting to come together as more of a coherent power, directives from Hitler himself, not just to Voss, but to other members of the German army as well. It's really clear that the Nazis are still developing their stranglehold on the area prior to their invasion of Poland in 1939. It showcases Europe in a time of transition, with the Italian black shirts and the SS intermingling, but also conflicts starting to spark in Asia around Siam and the Battle of Shanghai. The historical accuracy, save for the typical Indiana Jones supernatural heebie-jeebies, don't worry, there's a lot of that, it's just super intriguing. It really showcases a point in history in great detail outside of the main plot, doing a lot to make the world feel much more alive, and something I didn't expect to be explored in the way that it was. It's just really well done in that regard. So, the text logs and the documents, they do a lot to flesh out the world and its events, but those have to be put somewhere. So let's talk about the game's environmental design. You're going to visit 3 major locations over the course of this game, the first being the Vatican, and the city acts as a sort of hub area. It's absolutely full of these twisting pathways with activities and secrets to uncover. The best thing about these areas is that they are dense, they're gorgeously detailed, and they're full of these little historical flourishes that I mentioned. There are also some super iconic locations here, like the Sistine Chapel or the Sphinx in Giza, lending quite weirdly to this idea of like virtual tourism that this game has, if you can call it that, because these places are like swarming with Nazis. You get me. Each area is also really quite distinct, not just from a visual perspective, but the way that you have to contend with the space also changes. The Vatican is obviously much more densely populated than the desert in Egypt, and you can really feel it in the way that these spaces are designed, where the Italian map has this sense of verticality to it, where the others typically don't. Long story short, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle does a great job at offering you a variety of densely populated locations to explore, full of stealth challenges, crypts to delve into, and interesting characters. There's a lot of really, really good stuff here. The way that these levels are put together really feels like they're encapsulating a point in time. So we've talked about the story, the way that the environments are put together, and the historical context in which the game takes place. Next, I want to talk about the side content. And again, there is a lot of good stuff here, but unfortunately, it's not all great. The meat and potatoes of this side content is what the game refers to as field work, fully fledged side activities with their own storylines and cutscenes, and I can't think of a single one of these which I didn't enjoy, and the biggest reason is just how well they're written. I'll give you one example. In the Sistine Chapel, in order to enter, Indy has to be dressed as a monk, and upon entering, one of the fascist black shirts recognizes his accent as American, and this guy, for some reason, really loves Americans, and drags Indy into the confessional booth with him. You know what? Let me just show you.
Father, forgive me because I've sinned. I had an affair with my mother-in-law.
It's all right. Just say 3 Hail Marys.
No, Father, you don't understand. My wife is expecting a child, and I fear that.
What?
Yeah, let me finish, please. I fear that my mother-in-law is with the child also.
Jesus Christ, what have you done?
Wait. You are not a priest.
Going back to what I was saying before, the writing just perfectly encapsulates the vibe of the movies, really nailing that unserious tone and just being very funny overall. The best part is that they integrate quite seamlessly into the main plot, really fleshing out the characters within them, especially Gina, and always feel immensely satisfying due to this. Seriously, if they weren't like separated on a list, it would be really hard to tell what's considered side content versus the main story, as they both seem as integral to the characters and their development over the course of the game. Continuing with the good, there are also these puzzles that you'll find scattered throughout the world, labeled mysteries. Typically, these are like a locked safe or something similar, where the code will be spread across a few notes nearby. They're never so intricate that you feel like they're going to be impossible and you're never going to figure them out, but they're always more complex than the code being written on a fucking whiteboard or something like in The Last of Us. Especially some of the later puzzles, you're probably going to have to write some things down due to the info being spread across multiple different notes. But this like cross-referencing means that they always feel quite satisfying to complete. These mysteries might also be a small crypt to explore or a tomb to raid, latching onto that swashbuckling archaeologist fantasy, which almost always will end with a note to read or some collectible, but they seldom feel like they aren't at least worth experiencing due to their commitment to great design and immersion. These kinds of puzzles are also present in the main story, but are often much more detailed as Indian code delve into ancient ruins, Egyptian tombs, and the like. Yeah, there's a lot of like pointing light beams and mirrors at things, but some of these puzzles, especially later on, actually feel quite well thought out. And while they may not be as intricate as some other puzzlers out there, they definitely get the job done and demand that you at least put on your thinking cap. Now, not all of this side content is this high quality. There's a couple of quests that feel like really typical open world fetch quest busy work, but thankfully, the vast majority of them are not like this. I think the most egregious activity would have to be these like medicine bottles that are scattered around the world. These act as a sort of currency that you can use to increase your max health and stamina. You can buy a book that marks these on your map. There's rarely anything to these apart from just walking towards a map marker and looting them, preferably out of the view of enemies because they can aggro on you if they see you taking them. That's all well and good, if a little unsophisticated given the nature of some of the other collectibles.
Like, you see what I mean? It's just a little bland by comparison.
Enough about that though. I want to talk about the actual moment-to-moment gameplay. And as a big fan of this type of game, I'm very happy with what I've played. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle stealth systems are nothing new. Sneaking up behind enemies to knock them out, hiding bodies out of sight, that sort of thing. But the way that these spaces are put together, a little less like video game levels and more like actual functional areas, leads to these fantastic moments of emergent gameplay with less of a reliance on pre-scripted scenarios like in something like Dishonored. Let me explain. Stealth takedowns can only be performed in this game with a weapon in hand, be that the butt of a gun or various blunt objects that are scattered throughout the world. I'm talking brooms, I'm talking toilet brushes, guitars, that sort of stuff, which also work quite effectively as combat tools as well. Much of the stealth loop involves finding something to use as a weapon before taking out your enemies. This means that you're going to have to be a lot more aware of your surroundings when stealthing, not just when it comes to performing takedowns, but because if you're seen, fighting barehanded against a large group of enemies is clearly not ideal, so you're going to have to know where your potential weapons are. There are guns in this game, and they are quite effective, but just as you can take down your enemies in a couple of hits, they can do the exact same thing to you, meaning ranged combat is rarely your first port of call, especially because when you start shooting, your enemies will see that as free rein to retaliate. It's true that the game does give you a lot of ways to approach these encounters, yet it makes it clear that it does want you to take the stealthier option most of the time. One way the game emphasizes this is through the use of disguises, where Indy can dress up as various different factions in order to move through restricted areas unimpeded, unless of course an officer recognizes him. That is another way the game incentivizes not only preparation, but thoughtful use of its mechanics when moving through its spaces. Enemy soldiers will even speak to you differently depending on what outfit you're wearing.
Komm mir nicht zu nahe, Bursche.
That's close enough.
Ist und nun.
My only criticism of this system is that it isn't used more throughout the game. I can think of a lot of moments that could have been possible, like conversations with certain NPCs and the like depending on your outfit choice, but the game defaults to the simple act of moving through enemy territory mostly unimpeded. It feels a bit like a missed opportunity, but I digress. Now, when you eventually fuck up your stealthing, you're gonna have to fight your way out. And as I mentioned before, often you'll be relying on certain melee weapons that you've found around the area. You've also got a stamina bar, which drains every time you throw a punch or sprint around, all the usual stuff. The kicker here is that the stamina meter is really quite small and doesn't refill particularly quickly, so combat against multiple enemies or stronger enemies is as much about resource management as it is about landing hits, making it at least feel a little strategic. You can also use Indy's iconic bullwhip to stun enemies mid-fight, and man, the sound design is just so good here. The whip feels super heavy and cracks appropriately, and every single punch you throw is accompanied by something that almost sounds like gunfire. It can feel quite goofy at times, which is seconded by the absolutely atrocious enemy AI. Just look at this. Yeah, this is stupid, but there's a reason I don't count this as points against the game, because in the context of the combat and the tone, it actually fits weirdly well. Would it have been nicer if the enemies were a little bit smarter in how they navigated the environment? Sure. But that goofiness definitely encapsulates the feeling of the films, whether it's intentional or not. And all of this is compounded by the compulsive quips that Indy will throw out every time he takes someone down. Really nails the vibe.
Gotcha.
You can't have a game like this without a little bit of climbing thrown in there. And thankfully, it's at least inoffensive enough that it didn't really bother me. The camera does pan out in a way that I thought was a little bit strange at first, but it started to grow on me eventually, giving this real sense of momentum to Indy's whip swings in a way that I feel the first-person perspective wouldn't really capture. So yeah, there's a lot to this game, and a lot of the magic is in discovering this stuff for yourself, figuring out its many mysteries and puzzles. But before we finish up, I just want to touch on presentation. And yeah, this one's a looker. It's not just the ancient tombs or character designs. Every part of this game just radiates this reverence for the idea of Indiana Jones. The lush, thick jungles of Sukhothai, the Nazi dig sites in Giza, everything is just so immaculately put together, not just from a thematic standpoint, but visually. Look, I'm not going to go too far into this. You can watch the Digital Foundry video talking about the technical aspects of the game and the engine. I'll put it in the description. But Machine Games have really made something truly spectacular visually and design-wise. It's got full ray tracing, and the way that the game lights these internal, indirectly lit spaces is just really great. The only bad thing I'll say is that some of the character models are definitely approaching that sort of uncanny valley look at times, but once I got used to it, it didn't really bother me all that much. And that's a good point to finish. Despite some minor drawbacks here and there, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle goes hard. There's no doubt about that. It's just a really great stealth action, crypt spelunking, Indiana Jones-ass video game, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Something I didn't expect to be saying right now. The combat is definitely not leagues ahead of its competitors, but it really makes intelligent use of its environments through its weapon pickups and level design. Its combat and stealth systems can often make for these great and hilarious moments of emergent gameplay. Its hub areas are just these dense, immensely detailed playgrounds to explore, packed to the brim with side content that almost always feels worth doing, items to collect and puzzles to solve, bringing you not only some great gameplay scenarios and set pieces, but also this idea of virtual tourism to some extent, as some of these locations are truly iconic, especially given the time period. What was most interesting to me was the way that this game is almost able to stand in as a pre-World War II period piece and still act as an incredibly compelling Indiana Jones story at the same time. This period is just such an interesting point in world history, but is often ignored in games due to the more exciting nature of the actual conflict itself. Its deep political underpinnings definitely shine through if you're willing to read through text logs without ever overshadowing the main events at hand. But perhaps the best part about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is its ability to feel authentically Indiana Jones. From Troy Baker's amazing performance to its tone, the way that Machine Games have crafted this swashbuckling adventure is truly a sight to behold, and it's one that deserves to be experienced by as many people as possible. Man, what the hell? How is this game as good as it is? Best indie game? I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Next up will be the Game of the Year video, so make sure you get subscribed if you're not, so you don't miss out. If you like the video, give it a like. Let me know in the comments what you think. Are you going to play this one? Really took me by surprise. I really think it's worth giving a shot, especially because it's on Game Pass. Anywho, hope you guys have the best Christmas and spend some good quality time with your friends and families. Catch you in the next one.